Good evening once again, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. In accordance with the state statutes, I am to provide you a preliminary budget this evening to make our deadlines regarding the requirements for budget development. There's no action required this evening by you. I'm simply here to present the budget. And I thought it'd be a nice opportunity with that to present some background information or some context as we develop the budget, kind of going into what we had evaluated at what the budget means to folks in our community and so on and so forth. So with that, as you know, we have been working on the budget for some time, at least back to almost February of this year. And that kind of is our cycle. It starts to ramp up, and essentially this last month and a half or two is pretty busy on us and the staff. Essentially, here we are in the budget timeline, August 6th, where the preliminary budget is presented to you. Looking ahead, we have the question and answer session, which will be the first committee of the whole meeting of this month, and that will be at 4:15 in auditorium room 201 on August the 28th. The President's budget message will be due on September 4th. The first public hearing and reading of the budget will occur on September 18th, and then we hope to finalize the budget by the City Council's second reading on September the 25th, just so that we kind of know what's ahead of us moving forward. This budget was put together with 15 budget principles that the City Council developed along with myself and the directors of the city. They're here for just a reminder for you and also maybe as an introduction to the community. The City Council was very deliberate in providing direction to the staff on how to develop this year's budget. And these were some lofty goals that I and the staff were held accountable to meeting. And I can assure you that we have done just that with the presentation of this budget. We've also included our ability to financially model now, something that this city has not done in at least as long as staff can remember. We're able to see out now 5 years, a sort of view into the future of what our funding needs and challenges are so that we can begin to make modifications and adjustments sooner to prevent massive adjustments, being required at a much later date. It has been sobering work, as is often the case when you first start this work, but it has been very informational and has allowed us to make many of the recommendations which are included in your budget for your consideration this year. To give you an overall budget summary, the FY 2019 total budget is about $180 million. It's up $37 million from the FY 18 budget, which at first glance might alarm many in our community. So I thought I might go into why that is. First of all, most of the costs that are attributed to that difference are associated with money that we have saved up and are now spending on the Northwest Area Water Supply Project. Second of all, we'll be adding an additional $4.9 million for flood control projects throughout fiscal year 19, and that's above and beyond what we've spent this year or will be spent this year. Flood control property acquisitions, to continue the buyout program, will be to the tune of about $10.5 million. And general fund increases of about $4.6 million, which a lot of folks might confuse with staff or overhead, is actually not at all going to that. It's instead going to the SWIFT levy work for levy improvements and for the acquisition of a citywide system software solution, which we have been desperately needing for many years, as you've heard recently from us and the staff about. I wanted to talk about some budget observations quickly here. Fiscal year 2019 has been driven on a revenue standpoint from two primary components. One, depressed sales tax revenues, which continue to this day, and property valuation reductions. These two revenue drivers have created a situation where the costs have remained the same essentially for the city, but revenues continue to decline. We've gone through this conversation many times with you over the past several months, and that trend continues based upon the modeling projections that we can see. I can say that it looks like property valuations may begin to stabilize here. At least that's the preliminary information we're having. But a depressed sales tax revenue is going to be something that we're going to have to contend with going into the future. On the expense side, we have two very, very large projects that we will be dealing with for some time to come. The Northwest Area Water Supply Project because that's now out of court litigation, will be moving forward, requires us to rededicate revenues to that particular project. And of course, flood control, which we are right on the brink in constructing, is going to continue to require additional revenues as well going forward. So those are things that we have to gear up for and continue to be aware of as we move forward in subsequent budgets. Just wanted to point out, mostly for the folks at home, because I know you on the City Council have seen this many times, this is what sales tax collections have looked like, at least over the last couple of years. We expect that this will stabilize in fiscal year 2019. We've been monitoring this. We haven't seen it necessarily continue to drop through 18, but it's more or less flat at this point in time. There is a slight possibility it could increase, and I'll talk about that here near the end of the presentation, but at this point in time, this budget contemplates flat sales tax collections in 2017. I want to point out on this graph what's particularly important is you see that last section there on the right of the screen where it says a $7.2 million drop. If sales taxes remain flat like this each year hereafter, that's an additional $7.2 million of revenue that the city does not collect. And that's a problem kind of going forward. You'll see, as I've mentioned, because we've placed a lot of our levy activities or otherwise property tax activities into sales taxes, we need to make that shift back. We've talked about that many times. You'll see that here. Just in the last 3 years alone, we've lost $14.6 million because of those sales tax losses from a revenue standpoint. And to put that in perspective again, our entire property tax collection in FY17 was $17.9 million. So almost 3 years of sales tax reductions has essentially wiped out 1 full year of property tax reductions compared to FY17. We do expect to see a continued reduction in property valuations in this budget. We essentially have identified a 2% residential valuation decline and about a 5% commercial valuation decline. Because we have about 40% of our properties that are commercial and about the remainder in residential, when you combine those, we see about a 3% total decline in property valuations. That has to be made up in the rate. As you know, valuations impact rate based upon the dollars needed for this to cover the city's budget. So the rate impact is essentially 3.37 mils. We'll talk a little bit about how that impacts our citizens in just a moment, but I wanted you to track with me at least on how that was computed. The Northwest Area Water Supply Project has historically been financed through our second penny up until about 2011. Once that project became entangled or embroiled in litigation, the city councils of the past had decided to create a separate community grant program, and that money was dedicated towards that grant program in addition to other things. And so we stopped collecting revenue as a city for the Northwest Area Water Supply Project and used that revenue for other things. It is now time to restore the revenue that's required to the Northwest Area Water Supply Project and therefore make adjustments to the other uses of the revenues. And our recommendation is as follows. We believe, based on our modeling, that we can support the continued continued work and completion of the Northwest Area Water Supply Project for about 40% of that second penny. Now, according to our ordinance that's been established, in order for us to squeeze 40% more out of that second penny, we have to reduce proportionately the other 3 components of that second penny. So you'll notice that tax relief, which is a direct property tax buy down, will go down 12% from 30 to 18%. Our community facilities or flood control financing, or funding rather, will go from 30% down to 18%, which is another loss of 12%. And infrastructure used for, say, streets, sidewalks, other municipal infrastructure will need to be reduced by 16% from 40% to 24%. These numbers are all predicated on a revenue projection that suggests 1 penny of sales tax will equal $10 million worth of revenue for the city. So I wanted to convert what this means in regards to property taxes because in order to make up that revenue, we have to pull it from some other source. here's how it works. The recommendation is to shift those property tax activities from sales taxes back into property revenue or property tax revenue sources. So here's what it looks like. The tax relief, that 12% based on $10 million of projected revenue per penny, means that we have to make up $1.2 million if we want to continue property tax relief. Now, of course, it doesn't make sense to shift that back into property taxes, right? Because you're not really doing anything. So what we're essentially saying here is that the property tax relief essentially will go down 12%. That's what essentially that means. Community facilities or flood control will need to make up $1.2 million, and the 16% of the infrastructure will be about another $1.6 million, which gets at 40%, or essentially $40 million that has to be made up in that second penny in order for us to make room for that 40% needed to cover the NOS project.
Just one correction there. You had said 40 million, 4 million instead of 40.
My apologies. It's the head cold. I apologize about that. 4.0 million, or yes, thank you for that. That would be very bad. All right, so here's how it works out. That 4 million equals about 19.43 mils of property tax. So here's essentially what's gone on in our past. Since 2006, sales taxes, which is the darker of the two lines, has increased over time. And the city council of the past has decided to reduce property taxes. Between 11 and 12, there was a major shift, and a lot of levy activities were shifted toward, property tax activities were shifted toward sales taxes. And sales taxes made up essentially the dominant funding source for a lot of those property tax activities. That works well as long as that model continues. As of course you know, and I've presented that many times to you, since 2014 sales taxes have continued to reduce, and that reduction in sales taxes requires us to make up that funding difference. This is where a lot of people in our community get confused because they think we're raising property taxes just to raise property taxes, but the reality is we shifted from property taxes as a reliant source of revenues, a good portion, to sales taxes. And now we have to shift back. It's not a matter of reducing budgets and eliminating programs and services. It's a matter of what was the revenue source that we used. We moved from property taxes to sales taxes. Now the lines have crossed. Sales taxes are no longer there. We have to move those sales tax property activities back into property taxes. So this is what happened, as I mentioned. We shifted levy costs into sales taxes essentially in 2011 and 12. Now we have to shift them back to property taxes. It's essentially that simple. And we're doing this because we have to make room for the NOS project. That 40% that I mentioned to you, if we didn't have to essentially finance that this year, we probably wouldn't have to have much of a discussion about changes in the budget. So here's how it comes out in regard to mill impacts. I had mentioned 19.43 mills would be needed for NOS. An additional 3.37 mills is needed to adjust for the rate because of the valuation decline. But for the most part, that should be a net zero change for all property owners who either were flat in their valuations or actually saw a reduction in their property valuations. So this is the budgeted mill levy recommendation, adding 22.8 mills to the fiscal year mill levy amount of 106.46, which would lead us to 129.26 mills. That puts us almost in the ballpark with what our levy rate used to be back in around 2005 or so, 2005 or 6, if I remember correct. To put that in perspective, one thing we heard from the Citizens Focus Group that we held not too long ago was, give us dollars, don't give us mills. It's too hard to understand. What that means is essentially we would need to request $162 more per year for the median home valued price in Minot in order to balance this budget. That's essentially $13.50 more on that median valued home for the city of Minot. Now, how that relates to other organizations, as best we can tell right now, because they're still modifying their budgets as well, but as best we can tell, essentially, Park District will be flat. Ward County's already published this budget to an increase of about 1.3%. Our increase is tantamount to about 18.5% in our city portion, which, keep in mind, is less than a third of the entire total consolidated tax amount. And then Minot Public Schools looks to be maybe around flat or so. That means that when you add all of this together, the entire total consolidated tax increase for our citizens is going to be roughly around 6%. Significant on our portion, maybe not quite as significant over the total tax, consolidated tax burden. I wanted to note that last year stung particularly hard for a couple of reasons. First of all, it was a big increase that the city needed because we had to recognize that we couldn't continue to survive off of reserves any longer. Second of all, we had to address the declining sales tax revenues. And third of all, we had the state pull out of its 12% buy down last year. So that 12% reduction was eliminated and acted as a double whammy onto the citizens. That will not happen this year since it's already been addressed last year. And in addition, the increase this year being recommended is smaller as well. So we do hope that that will have a more favorable impact, all things considered, as it relates to the moving forward of this budget. On utility rates, we're not proposing any rate changes to water, to stormwater, or to sanitation. We are proposing about a $3.16 per month increase, which is a little less than 3% for the sewer. This is based upon large sewer projects that are mounting, in addition to some expansion sewer projects in the southwest area of Minot, so we expect that area to grow. I would be remiss to not take the opportunity to remind the City Council, but maybe introduce to our community, that we have been very diligent as a staff in trying to remain efficient in the delivery of our services while maintaining the quality of those services to our citizens. Not many people in our community know this, but essentially there have been numerous efficiencies, cost avoidance strategies, and otherwise good works of our department heads and finance staff that have offset major budget pressures on past budgets and including this budget. They include many of the things that you see on the screen here, certainly not all of them, but things like procuring, millions of dollars in grants. This city does a tremendous job in securing grants, in leveraging money from others to do the good work of our community. In fact, grants and donations are the single largest revenue source for the city of Minot. It's an absolute feat. Retiring high-interest debt sooner, deferring projects, conducting more work in-house, being more lean as a staff, salvaging parts from vehicles and other equipment to use them on other vehicles and equipment that prevents us from having to buy new. There's all sorts of different efficiencies that our leaders in our community and our staff have undertaken to the tune, when I asked them to quantify it, we worked with the finance department to make it legit, $78 million just in the last 4 years alone has been saved in our community from the valiant efforts of our department heads and our staff. And I couldn't be more proud to say that. I don't know of a city, at least that I've been aware of or worked for or whatnot, that can say that. This is absolutely impressive. So I think that should be highly recognized for our staff. Additionally, we didn't just stop on those, we continued to look and hunt and peck for everything else we could find. We did cut $700,000 from the operations budget this year. Again, remember last year we cut $5 million, so we've cut another $700,000 this year. It's getting harder to find that. And at the direction of the leadership of the City Council, we were asked to go and talk with many of the organizations we have historically financed in the form of grants and donations ourselves, and we've had to pull back on some of those to the tune of about $570,000. Those two efforts alone, separate and aside from the efficiencies I just talked about, also reduced our budget by $1.3 million, or reduced the need for raising the budget another $6.5 million. So I stand before you this afternoon to say that we have continued to be as lean and as efficient as we can. It has been difficult, but we know it's important, and it's something that our staff take absolutely seriously each and every day. Do we make mistakes sometimes? Yes, we do. That's just the nature of working fast and furious in a very stressful environment sometimes with limited resources. I mean, that'll happen. But I can tell you I'm very proud of the team for all their efforts and what they've done in helping to pull this budget together and for the efficiencies and cost avoidance strategies that we've been able to pursue. A couple future considerations for you, and then I'll let you jump into the budget books. The NOS sales tax adjustment should be sufficient for us. We don't imagine that next year we're going to have to ask for more. We think that 40% will set us up to be able to finish out the project. Now that's based on the information we know today. That could change if we get a revised estimate, if we get other components to the project that need to be built, if there's a different share contribution or less interest from the federal government or the state or whatnot. Those are all subject to change, but at this point, with the information we know, we should be fine on NOS. However, flood control will continue to be a challenge for us going forward. I've mentioned this several times to you. Also, I mentioned it to the Source River Joint Board and others. While it is absolutely a critical component of our work as a community, continuing to find money to pull these projects together in the way that they've been envisioned is going to be a tall order for us for the foreseeable future. However, the funding that's been recommended in this budget takes care of next year and also sets us up for future years as well. The Northwest Fire Station number 5 is not included in this budget, nor is the City Hall building included in the budget. Those were the wishes of the City Council to postpone those projects, so we have done that. And just as a reminder, streets maintenance, although we are making a bit more of an improvement there, there's still a sizable backlog and remains a concern for us in future budgets. Wanted to just look ahead at a couple things that as we try to broaden our view down the road further, we do see the economy starting to improve. We've heard that, we've seen the numbers, that's good news. We also know that ag and oil prices are on the rise, and so is oil activity out west. Property valuations appear to have stabilized. Projection modeling suggests that this should be the last major adjustment to property taxes, provided that we can address flood control with some alternative funding source. And as you know, some of that's being discussed already. The Hub City formula changes could bring in about $2.5 million more per year. We won't know that really till the end of next year or so, after the legislature does its thing early on. Consolidations of services, we talked about the parks, potential parks district and city recreation merger, as well as the 2 libraries. That may save us money. It might even save the other jurisdictions money as well, and therefore all of our taxpayers. Online sales tax collections with the recent Supreme Court ruling may bring in significant revenues on sales taxes. That may also help us in the future. The federal government's interest in the Phase 4 of flood control, provided we can retain that, will be significant as well. And lastly, the state legislature is working on lower interest infrastructure loans. That will be significant for us too, because our modeling right now does not include that lower interest financing, and that does change things for us going forward. So next steps, as I leave you with the budget, please review the information that was presented to you in the 3 budget workshops that we held last month. Review the fiscal 19 budget book, the one that's being delivered. Has it been delivered yet? Do you have it yet? Okay, perfect. And then generate your list of questions. We know you'll have lots of questions. Encourage you to develop a long list of questions. Meet with me or department heads in advance to get some of the simple or basic questions addressed. There is limited time at the committee of the whole meeting to have every single small question addressed. We're available right now from here through the rest of the budget process. So if you have small, easy to get questions, inquiries or whatnot, please don't hesitate. Don't wait for the Q&A. But if you think it's something that everybody needs to know about, including the community or your other aldermen or whatnot, by all means, bring it to the Q&A. We'll address it. I ask that you don't surprise the staff. Of course, nobody likes that. We'll be better prepared the more you help to prepare us. So if you can tell us, hey, we're going to ask you a question on this, or I've got this concern, or what's this all about, or whatnot, we can do that digging, we can find the research, we can get the answers, and we can present it to you, because after the Q&A, there isn't going to be a whole lot of opportunity for additional conversation about the budget unless you direct us to hold another Q&A, for example, at some point in time. So please come prepared. Please ask as many questions in advance, and please get us your questions in advance so that we can prepare as well. Lastly, the Q&A will be held in Auditorium Room 201 on August 28th. It's a Tuesday at 4:15. And this will be essentially your opportunity to work one-on-one with all the department heads and myself and the finance staff to get into all the nitty-gritty of the budget. So you don't have to have questions this evening, but I'll stand for any questions you might have. There's quite a bit of information in the budget book, and look forward to your feedback on that when you get an opportunity.
City Manager Barry, I first want to lead off at least with some comments. First and foremost, I want to commend you and the rest of the staff that have put an amazing amount of hours into this, and not only just developing the budget, but in the amount of time that you've spent with leadership in developing the principles. I can safely say without a shadow of a doubt, this is probably the best prepared in terms of fiscal budgeting and visioning that the leadership body, the elected leadership body, has ever had within the city in terms of getting together with staff and understanding what the elected body foresees as priorities, and then helping us understand the short-term and long-term repercussions of decisions of the past, the current, and what our future needs are going to be with projected costs. So that was no short order of trying to gather that information and put it into an understandable format for a lot of us. So it's a very difficult budget, and it's very difficult to sit here and even look at the base principles of what's before us for a second year. But I do fully understand what went into it, and can look into the 5-year budgeting process and see that we're on the right track now. We'll definitely dig into this and have those questions ready. But first and foremost, to you and to the rest of the staff, outstanding work in getting these numbers put together and putting the information together in a very concise, understandable format. And lastly, this one is going out to, I think, the rest of everyone that is in the city of Minot. We've looked at the cost of convenience, and this isn't a platform by any means, but I think it's more of a community soapbox. When we take a look at our sales tax numbers and the size of our city and compare it to a time when we were much smaller and still generating more revenue, the online sales significantly impacts us each and every day with our own property tax. And I know I'm speaking to the choir within this room, but I'm hoping that it's reaching a larger audience with the cameras that the cost of convenience is our property tax. We chose a number of years ago that we were going to subsidize our own property tax through sales tax. And every time the parcel delivery shows up on our door from dollars that are headed out of state, those are dollars that are gone forever, and certainly have impacted us for the last couple of years and will again this year. So it is my push to the general public. Understandably, not everything can always be bought locally, but buying Minot first makes a difference. Other questions or comments from the council? Alderman Padragula.
I wanted to echo your remarks, particularly in terms of complimenting city staff, the city manager, the finance director, and their staffs. This is my 11th budget. I think it's more equal to any number of budgets anyone on this council has had. But I think more importantly, my perspective is more historical. My first budget was in 1998. And I can appreciate the tremendous changes, the tremendous improvements that you and your staff have made. I think this council is much better prepared, and so is the public, for understanding the budget, where it's coming from, what the key issues are, and the tremendous efforts that have been made to keep services reasonable. I frankly would like to see improvement in the quality, not necessarily the quantity, but quality of services. But I want to assure people that the whole community is as well prepared as we can be, certainly better than, in my opinion, we ever have been for receiving a budget and continuing the conversation that's been started many months ago with the budget workshops. So I wanted to thank you and your staff really in the strongest possible terms. This is really an exemplary process. I don't know what will happen, but I think we're getting a start on it as best as we can, and that's really noticed and really appreciated.
Thank you.
Alderman Walski.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. Mr. Barry, I echoed all of the previous comments. I greatly appreciate the hard work that has gone into putting this together. It's difficult to look at in terms of the increase, but throughout those budget preparation and workshops, that's what we asked for. We asked for the full picture of what our obligations are and the investments that we really have to make to keep the operation just keeping pace with the changes in the world. I have one kind of brief procedural question here. Why have we chosen the municipal auditorium for the Q&A? I wonder, with the new investment that's been made and the cameras and the systems in here, if this might not be a better forum. I'm just curious behind the logic behind that.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Wolski, that's a great question. Essentially, the attempt is to do this: provide a much larger space for more people to attend. And it's hard to believe that there may be more than this room can hold, but I've seen that happen. In addition, it's an opportunity for us to have all of our department directors sit at a table with you on a one-on-one basis and have a more free exchange of information in a more efficient manner than to have one director come one at a time to answer each and every one of your questions. If it's your desire, however, to hold that particular meeting in this room, we can certainly accommodate that. There are some logistical issues in holding it in another room, particularly the cameras, for example, and sometimes the audio, although we have that worked out for this year. But that was essentially the thinking. And if it's your desire to have it here and you'd be more comfortable in this room, we can certainly accommodate you that way.
Okay.
Yes, Alderman Wolski.
Well, kind of a final comment here, and this is, I would say, much more for my fellow aldermen and Mayor Sitma and really the rest of the community. I think this is far beyond the scope of staff. You guys have taken the direction we've given you, and I think you've delivered what we asked for at this point. But I think the larger challenge for us as a community is looking inside our sales tax spending in those particular buckets and looking at the way we've been using those property tax buy-downs. And I think one of the practices or one of the questions we're going to have to face is whether that has been a benefit to us, frankly, because I think there may be a systemic flaw in that policy overall. And I think we witnessed the state attempt to do that for a couple years. I think we saw them in the last legislative session get away from that practice because it really isn't a reduction in property tax. It's really just a shell game and where we are getting our revenue from in terms of spending. And so I think the larger question always comes to the spending and the transparency that comes with funding our needs with a revenue source that is easy to understand for the taxpayers. And sales tax does a pretty good job of obscuring that, I think, when we use these buy downs in this manner. So that's a conversation I think we're all going to need to have over the next, this month, and I think long into the future, in terms of how do we get ourselves onto just a better path in terms of our spending and revenue and making it transparent and easy to understand. So.
Any further comments or questions for City Manager this time? Alderman Straight.
Thank you, Mayor Sitma. Mr. Berry, I thank you for your work, the staff's work. The one question that I'll be the enemy maybe at the start is the public. Many people in the public have reached out to me and they appreciate the modeling. They appreciate the staff diving into the historical, how we got here, where we're heading. The public would like to hear one time how in some fashion we could cut something. And I know you and I have talked about this a great deal. We've talked about the stress on staff, bulging at the seams in this particular building. But the public sees another possible property tax increase on the horizon, and they are going to read it in the paper tomorrow, and they're going to call us. And they're going to say, Shannon, here you are again. This is ridiculous. And so I just want to put that out there. And I know it's difficult to say we can't do any more, Alderman Straight. We can't decrease more. But the public would like to see it in some fashion. And I don't know exactly what that looks like. I feel like I maybe got off to a bad start last year by talking about the pay plan. I think many of us would like to redo that whole conversation. But as I look at the figures of, we hired 416 employees and we've lost quite a few, I can own the fact of what's happened over the last year and the role I played in that. I feel bad about it. I met with our police chief 2 weeks ago. But the public does want to hear that. We've slowed some projects. I think they need to hear the specifics of what it would look like, how it would affect services. I appreciate knowing that we're not trying to raise rates on a whole host of fees. But that is one thing that I'm mindful of, because my phone rings like all of my colleagues up here. And that is the one little vignette that will be taken out of tonight. And the other thing I heard of our last liaison committee meeting is let's please reach out to the other political subdivisions and let them know where we're at, where we're heading, because I know that you and I, Tom, have been at other meetings where we have taken the brunt of criticism, and I think the more we can get out in front of that, knowing that we're going to have a lot of heated conversation and discussion and the questions are all good and relevant, the more we can do that right now, I think is going to help also provide that greater context that the public oftentimes doesn't catch. So those are my two thoughts.
Great.
Thank you, sir.
You bet.
One of the hardest parts, I think, with this is trying to convey with a lot of folks that just maintaining basic services is where we're at right now, and even stretching ourselves to do that as a city. And looking at how much we've grown as a city and how little we've grown in terms of City Hall, I think is a testament to that. And it's never easy. Shannon and many others that are still double mortgaged up from 2011 to sit here and say $13, $14, $15 a month with the utility bills, at least with the projected. But one thing that we've also been tasked with as a leadership body is providing basic services. And certainly the questions will come in the next couple of meetings, and I think we can help convey some of those questions from the public to the city staff and get those answers. Any further comments or questions? Yes, Alderman Janser.
Mayor Sitma, thank you. I just want to foot stomp the piece that was in the presentation about digging into this budget soon. Those of us here, that Q&A meeting will creep up on us very quickly. And so budget your time, get into the book, come up with your questions, and make sure that we're ready when that meeting arrives.
Thank you, Alderman Janser, absolutely. Any further questions for City Manager Barry? Oh, yes, Alderman.
I'll just make a comment. It's the best budget I've ever seen, but this is my first one, so that's pretty easy to do. Getting into this is a lot of information, I think, for citizens to understand that this is a very trying time. This is a course correction that the city is taking from kicking the proverbial can down the road for many years. So this isn't the city doubling down on anything. This isn't the city, like we said, providing anything above basic services and essential services. So like I say, I encourage, and I'll be honest with you, I haven't got a lot of phone calls yet, and that's part of something that I encourage. So if you don't have my phone number to anybody who's out in Facebook or out in the media, it's 701-500-3500. I encourage you to reach out to me or any other alderman with questions, because I would love to educate on how we got here, because that is the root of the problem, is how we got here and what we're doing to fix it. And in this perfect storm of NAWS and flood control, and I encourage, and I don't know if I said thank you for the budget and for the assets and the tools that you provide. You do a fantastic job, and I think we as a city need to understand that being efficient costs dollars. Working smart isn't free. We've worked hard in this community for a very long time, and I think we've just said we can do it. We can cut this or we can cut that, and the reality is we can't anymore. We're down to the bare bones, and that's my opinion, I guess, and I think a lot of people would share that in our budget. I'd like to see us, and I think, and this is, again, my opinion, I think investing in flood protection is an important thing for our community. It's an asset for our community, but it can't be the only thing we invest in our community. And I encourage us as a council to be very cognizant of that, and our city staff you will have my vote of confidence to bring any ideas to the table when it comes to making our city more efficient and making our city more competitive in any way, shape, or form. So again, thank you to you and the staff. It's not a position I envy, being asked to do what you guys do. And just to piggyback, again, to reiterate something that Mr. Wolski said, and I'll kind of back him, and I'll take it a step further. This budget isn't keeping pace with anything. It's catching up because we're behind the 8 ball. We've fallen behind. And like I said, this is a course correction that needs to happen, and I'm excited to be a part of it. This is why I got involved, and I know why everyone else got involved, is because we want to be a part of what our community has to offer and be a part of growing it. So.
Thank you, Alderman Pittner. Any further comments or questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir.
I have just maybe one or two comments. I want to thank you, the City Council, for your courage and your support and all along the way here. This is not an easy job for you, and you will bear the brunt of this budget. We know that. You have the hard work now. And we had to struggle ourselves internally trying to put this thing together, but now you guys will have the really tough work figuring out what to do with it. So I don't envy your position, but I will say that I have been very grateful to your guidance, your leadership, and your support along the way, to the information and direction that you've provided to me privately and as a group. And I would say this to the citizens out there who are just tuning in now about our budget. This has been going on for months. It's been going on for 18 months, really, since I got here. And there's no reason for anyone in our community to be ignorant about what's going on the budget. We have multiple presentations, multiple videos, all the information you could want about how we got where we are and why we're having to do what we're doing is contained in those presentations and videos. So it's incumbent upon every citizen in our community to own this as much as the rest of everyone else, because they have to get informed and they have to get engaged. And we ask that they do that because maybe there is some fantastic, super idea that we haven't thought of that we need. That'd be super. We're looking for that. And that's why we want you to get them engaged now and to have that dialogue now. So we're not trying to hide anything. We're trying to be as open and transparent as we can possibly be about this. But it is incumbent on our residents to get educated as well. They can't take one presentation out of context or one, social media post out of context. They have to own it, and they have to go research it. They have to find out for themselves. And I think then all of our jobs will get easier because we'll work for the same collective. So with that, that's my challenge to the community, and my thanks to you as a city council. Appreciate your support.
Thank you, City Manager.